This basketball team should be able to shoot the lights out, but is it going to be enough? Let's deep dive on Austin Rapp. We got Coach Gauthier. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Harings. Thank you for tuning in, for being a part of this community. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Today's episode, we are finishing our deep dive series with Coach Gauthier on all of the transfer guys coming in. So Austin Rapp is today. Thoughts on his offense and his defense, the good and the bad, and how it fits into the bigger picture here. Coach, man, always great to have you on the show. Always awesome to do these deep dives so we can really go into these new Badger players coming in. We're talking offense, defense, the good, the bad. Let's talk Austin Rapp. So Austin Rapp, 33 minutes a game last year at Portland. He was a freshman, so you have him for 3 years. I hesitate to say you have anybody for 3 years now, but he has 3 years of eligibility left, so that is something to factor in. 13.8 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and most importantly, shot 7.6 threes last year, hit 35% of those. Let's start offense. Big picture, what do you like about Austin Rapp coming in from Portland?
What I like most about Austin Rapp is his ability to shoot the basketball. Like you said, Ryan, you went over his stats and stuff, but if you just watch his film and watch his game, he has a pure stroke. Even though he's, 4'5" size or whatever, he shoots it like a guard, transition, runs the floor in transition, really sweet stroke, more of a finesse type, not a lot of physicality in his game, more skill. So, that the biggest asset that he has is just his ability to shoot the basketball.
Yeah, like you said, let's not bury the lead. I mean, it's 35% on 7.5 shots a game. And this is something I'd love for you to expound on this, because a lot of people look at percentages, but shooting volume matters. Shooting that percentage on 7.5 shots when you're 85% from the line, 35% from three. What does it do to an offense when you have a guy who can shoot 7-8 times a game and hit 35% of them?
Hey, you and I talk about it all the time. It's floor spacing, right? Especially with a big. Then you have to guard him with somebody who is comfortable extending out on the perimeter away from the basket, which, a lot of bigs and a lot of teams don't have that luxury. So, that's a huge advantage to it. What you said, though, is, he took 236 3-point attempts on the year, and he only attempted 340 shots from the field.
Yeah.
So, you're talking 70% or so of his shots are straight threes, and that's catch and shoot threes. So again, more of a finesse, catch and shoot, space the floor, poses a matchup problem, for defenses. Cause like you said, what does that force the defense to do? They have to have somebody to go out there, and extend and be comfortable to guard in space like that. But again, you look at his rebounding totals. He only had 18 offensive rebounds on the year, so that's less than half a offensive rebound per game. Only averaged 6.5 rebounds, for the game. So, and you watch his film, he doesn't really go chase down balls, get rebounds out of his area, and he's got a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. So, long story short, he is really kind of like a shooting guard trapped in a big man type of body.
Yeah, I want to jump more on his shot here really quick and then get into some of the things that maybe concern us. I really like when you watch film, there's a lot of subtle movement to his game. He doesn't stand still. He finds open spaces. He hunts shots. And then I love he catches it set up. Like mechanically, he is ready to shoot. It's a quick release. He'll catch it with range behind the 3-point line. It's a high release. It's a pretty consistent form. I think the shooting's going to translate because of the release point, because of the way his shot is set up, because of his mechanics. I think the shooting is all there. Let's get into the rest of – oh, go ahead. Unless I missed something.
I was going to say, I mean, you summed it up really well. His shooting mechanics are elite. And like I said, for him to be at his size and the way he runs the floor, like in transition, you you would think it's a 2-guard. Like, I mean, he will step in, like you said, feet, hands ready, short, compact, high release, and he's gunning, off of first pass in transition. And you don't see a lot of guys his size with that kind of ability.
He's going to drive some 4s and 5s in the Big Ten nuts because those guys are trained to run to the rim in transition, and he just stops at 24 feet and pops. Like, that's who he is. He's not driving into the lane, which leads us to some of the negatives. Let's talk about a few of the concerns. You hit on one of them for me. It's the assist-to-turnover ratio. It's about a 1-to-1, not ideal. And then when you talk finishing, him getting to the rim, him as a post-up guy, he lacks some of the physical ability to finish vertically. And that's only going to get harder in the Big Ten when you're playing these bigger, longer, more athletic wings, these bigger, longer, more athletic front courts. He feels just kind of like a shooter now without much else.
You're exactly right. That's kind of my main concern. And you and I have talked about this in prior shows and stuff. We're both are under the assumption they're going to play him at the 4 and Nolan at the 5 because, like you were saying, Ryan, you don't really see on film, and his game is not situated. He's not going to sit on the block, and you're not going to throw it into him, and he's not going to go get you a bucket with his back to the basket. We talked about you don't necessarily need a big man that has a back to the basket type of game to get you a bucket, but you do need somebody who's going to get in there, get open, make himself available, and then find an open guy, on a skip or a reversal. We talked about Steven Crowell, and how people are really going to miss him in the Badgers, specifically in the fact that you could throw it to him in the block and he could go get you a bucket with his back to the basket, but he was an elite passer out of the post. He had 90 assists to 52 turnovers last year. Austin Rapp doesn't have that. He's more 1-to-1. And, I don't really see him going, running the floor, rim running, blowing up a defender and catching it on the post and then kicking it out. Like we just discussed, he's going to run the floor. He's going to space on the wing, or he's going to run to the corner. So, I'm interested to see, it looks like the Badgers are going to kind of go in with this 5-out look, or like you and I talked about, Nolan Winter is going to, I guess, be their back to the basket big, if they want to put somebody, go at a 4-out, 1-in type of look.
Which I think is what they'll do. I just think with Winter, you're going to get more of a scoring punch from there and less of a passing punch. Like I think Winter can score fine in that situation, but he's not going to give you we can't double this guy because he's going to find the open shooter as well as Crowell could. And let me ask you, my big concern with Rapp is now he's going to be going to the Big Ten with much longer, more athletic defensive front courts that are going to cover ground on those closeouts a lot quicker. He doesn't really have a counterpunch. And I worry if teams are just going to kind of stay glued to him a little bit and take away a lot of his shooting, and then you're not going to get a lot from Austin Rapp.
I agree with you regarding that concern. And the other thing is, I think it's going to be an adjustment factor we talked about just from a physicality standpoint, especially a physicality in the Big Ten to what he was used to in the West Coast Conference, and we talked about it with Hunter coming from Central Arkansas, and Amos, you saw it coming from Northern Illinois. It's just, it's those leagues are just different on a lower level, but more than that, it's also not only the Big Ten being a power conference, but the physicality in the Big Ten is unlike any other league around the country, with how they let, bodies just bang into each other, and how they how it's officiated and how defenders are able to do certain things on the defensive end, which I think is going to be an adjustment for Rapp in that regard as well. And like you said, that the straight athleticism, because we talk about the Illinois bigs, they run those 4 or 5, their 4 and 5s are bigs that are perimeter orientated, really good athletically. They're not going to have problems running with Rapp in transition in those scenarios too. And, the Illinois skilled bigger guys can break somebody off the bounce and get to the rim. And we haven't really seen that yet in Rapp's game. Now he's young and he might be able to develop that, especially as he gets stronger. But, right now, like you said, he's kind of a one-trick pony in the sense it's more of a pure catch and shoot, and he's not really going to, attack a long closeout, get to the paint, and finish at the rim.
Yeah, I think it's a good point when you start talking about some of the potential 4s and 5s he's going to match up with in the Big Ten. You talk about the guys at Illinois, Michigan State, Purdue, like some of these people that are brought in are going to be tough matchups for him. We need to take a quick second there. We're going to come back and talk about defensively. What do we see from Austin Rapp, the good, the bad, where we think he might fit into this team and into the Big Ten? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. Listen, FanDuel is incredible, and we've been watching the NBA playoffs as they've been going on, and it's been kind of an awesome playoff with all the comebacks and everything going on. FanDuel is here for you to spice up the NBA playoffs experience, make it a little more enjoyable. Plus, Major League Baseball is going on, and I love betting on Major League Baseball over at FanDuel because they have every aspect of this covered, from parlays to futures to teasers to spreads. It's all over there on FanDuel.com with the easiest and simplest user interface you can find on a sportsbook. It is simple to get started. There's user help. All the options are easy to find. And when you get that payout, you get it quickly and easily on FanDuel.com, unlike some other places. Head over to FanDuel.com right now. It's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If you win, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's jump back into this with Coach. Let's talk defense. And something you and I have talked about, and we even talked about it before the show, Wisconsin ended the year scoring 89 and lost. Where does Rapp – let's start with the good, because I do think there's some good and bad here. Let's start with the good. What do you like about Austin Rapp defensively?
I like his mobility. I think he does have good feet. We talked about him running the floor in transition. You talked about him doing a really good job being fundamentally sound, shot ready, feet ready. I think that translates on defense, right? I think he has quick feet. He's not heavy-legged, when he's running the floor and stuff like that. So I think, he can get to spots and cut off drivers, not the most athletically gifted guy. So out in space, obviously against a smaller offensive player, like any other typical big man, he'll have some problems out in space. But I do think he has quick feet, and he's really mobile and he's versatile. So we talked about, I think the Badgers are really, we saw it this year. They really switched 1 through 4 predominantly on defense, with the ability at occasion to switch 1 through 5 when they went smaller. And I think that's kind of what the Badgers are looking maybe to do, a little more versatility on the defense end. You kind of hear it in some of the postseason interviews with Guard and stuff about defensive versatility that, with Rapp and even with Nolan, I could see them maybe switching 1 through 5. So I think Rapp gives you that kind of versatility in that defensively. I think what you and I discussed, the issue is going to be, is he going to be able to bang and defend more physical, back to the basket, interior type of, 4s and 5s.
Yeah, and I want to kind of pigtail off what you just said there, because I think he's an intelligent defender. You mentioned cutting off angles, kind of understanding where he needs to be. He has a good basketball intelligence to him. You can see on the closeouts on the perimeter, he closes out intelligently. He's not jumping off his feet, going wildly around. Even on post defense, which I agree with you, that's kind of one of my biggest concerns. But he understands what he's trying to do there. He walls up pretty well. He doesn't leave his feet a ton. He makes people hit shots over him. Now in the Big Ten, he's going to be playing guys a couple inches bigger, more explosive, stronger. But I do like the intelligence. I think he's going to be probably a solid team defender. I think he moves his feet, like you said, pretty well as a 6'10" guy. He challenges shots pretty well. He has length. I think all that's there. The question for me is, again, what happens when you're playing an athletic 4, right? And that team just says, we're going to find the pigeon, and the pigeon's going to be Austin Rapp.
Exactly. And that's going to be the cat and mouse, and it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out as the season progresses, because you and I have kind of alluded to it and talked about is it's almost like the Badgers are going all in on this, 5 out spread, perimeter spacing, ball movement, player movement stuff to try to get teams to adjust to them more for opponents defensively. How are they going to match up with the Badgers offensively? But to your point, that, I really like you bringing that up, is if the shoe's on the other foot and say they go smaller at the 4 position and have more of a stretch four where, you know, it might be a 6'6", 6'7" athlete type at the four that's really good in space, that can score off the bounce and the catch and shoot. And Rapp is going to have to guard a more athletic, dynamic four. If that's, you know, if the Badgers are playing him at the four, Nolan at the five, then how does that work for the Badgers defensively and what they're trying to do and how they scheme up that type of opponent?
And I think this, you mentioned this too. You know, he's not a great rebounder. Now, it's more so on the offensive side, but even on the defensive side, he's not a guy where if the other team goes 6'7", if they have kind of a springy 6'7" guy, Rapp's not going to go and necessarily dominate that guy with his size because that's not his game. So the other team can go small on him, I think, and take advantage of that strength without Wisconsin being able to punish on the other side.
Yeah, and you brought up, you know, that's a really good point that you bring up too, is, you know, watching the film stuff, you know, a lot of guys, when I judge whether they're a good rebounder or not, is do they go get balls outside of their own area? And you haven't really seen that from him. Again, he's young and hopefully he'll develop, because like you said, he does have a good basketball feel, a good basketball IQ. So maybe, you know, as he gets more experience, he'll have a nose for the ball and playing balls coming off the rim and getting angles to, you know, maybe be more aggressive on the glass. But, you know, the ultimate concern, to your point, is, okay, say if the Badgers want to go small and they play him at the five, okay, well, you and I both are having difficult to see him being able to guard a five. So that poses a defensive liability or an issue for the Badgers to address. Or like you said, you and I both agree he's more of a four. If a team goes smaller with a more, you know, a four guard type of offense and stuff, what's your matchup? How are you going to guard? How's he going to guard a four? So, you know, it would be really interesting to see how these pieces fit and what the Badgers are trying to do, more specifically, like you said, from a defensive perspective, because ultimately that was their Achilles heel. You know, you've done a really good, we talk about it all the time. They scored 89 points in the second round of the NCAA tournament and lost.
It didn't move on. That's wild.
And yeah, and it wasn't because of offense. So, like, with what their off-season moves have been, you know, as exciting and good that they look offensively, have they really addressed what really ended up costing them, you know, a second weekend berth in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question that you hit on. And let me ask you this, because I've been turning this in my head. Is it possible that this starting five is better defensively as a unit? Because I think Boyd coming in gives you more. I like Boyd defensively a little bit more there. He gives you a little more of a point of attack guy. Tonje, we love Tonje. He wasn't a great defender. You bring Rhodey in, who's, I think, maybe a better team defender coming from Virginia. Obviously, that scheme has changed a little bit, but I think he might give you a little better there. I think you're more athletic 1 through 5, probably, without Crowell sliding Winter to the 5. So maybe you can switch even 1 through 5 a little bit. Yeah. Boyd gives you a little toughness at that guard spot, a little more size and length than a guy like Klesman. I think it's possible they're better as a team defense this year.
I see that. And I think I really like what you said at the end right there. I do think they have more size and length. You know, because if you really look at them, you know, we loved Kamari. We loved Max, but, you know, neither one of them had, I mean, Max had decent size, but he didn't have length.
Mm-hmm.
Kamari didn't have either. Didn't have size or length.
Yeah, so he had heart. He
guarded hard, and, you know, he was quick, but he had his defensive limitations because athletically, you know, he just, you know, so I think Boyd is a tremendous upgrade because he has the size and the length. You know, point well taken on Tonje. As great as he was offensively and stuff, they kind of hit him defensively. Now, he gave effort. I mean, he was a willing defender. Wasn't a great defender, but a smart defender, willing defender. I think Rhodey is actually above average defender, and he offers really good length and given his size. So it's an upgrade from Tonje's size and length. And then, of course, you have Blackwell. And then to your point, Rapp and Winter, it gives you more length at both spots and more athleticism, because Crowell was a very good defender, especially in the interior. But now if Nolan's your 5 and Rapp's your 4, to your point, I think you're a lot longer and more versatile and have more athleticism. So I can buy that 1 through 5 defensively. They could be, as a unit, I think, can be much better than they were last season.
Yeah, I can see it. Although I could also see that being a little matchup dependent, right? If you're playing a really burly team, think of traditional Purdue, the way Michigan State can hit you on the boards, those kind of things, maybe you're a little worse off. But if you're playing a team that spreads you out a little bit more, wants to run a little more, wants to run a lot of action, maybe you're better off now. I can see it kind of matchup dependent there.
Absolutely. And the one question I have for you, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, that I've been kind of thinking about too, is, and this was an issue with last year's team that we talked about quite a bit, who's their defensive stopper? If you're playing an All-American from, Purdue or Illinois or Michigan State or whatever, and, you have to stop somebody, who's their go-to defender? Because I don't know. I'm not sure. As a group, I think this year's squad could be better defensively, but it's kind of the same issue they had last year is who's that? Okay, you're guarding the other team's best player and you're shutting them down. Because, I think Blackwell would have that in him, but so much is needed from him offensively from an effort standpoint and just, concentrating on offense that it's hard to make him a defensive stopper. And, there were times last year where he didn't show a lot of interest at times guarding defensively. So that's my question is who's their go-to stopper?
Dude, I love this question because I've been thinking about it too. It's been keeping me up at nights a little bit. I'm going to get to that next on Locked On Badgers because we have to take a quick break. We're going to do that. Who's the stopper? And I have a couple concerns for Coach. I'm gonna throw my concerns to him and have him tell me what is his biggest concern with the ones I've got. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick second for our friends of the show, and a quick second, as always, to say thank you for tuning into the show. Appreciate you all. All right, Coach. I think here's what I think it needs to be. I don't know if it can be. I don't think it can be Blackwell because there's only so many Johnny Davises in the world that are your lead scorer, your alpha, and also a defensive guy. I think it's got to be Rhodey. I think Rhodey has got to be the guy in a Josh Gosser type of a way where he's not an elite athlete, where he's still going to struggle at times with the elite perimeter guys, but can you give maximum effort? You have enough length and size to guard 1 through 3, which means you should be able to survive in some of those actions. He's a veteran. He's physical. I think he can be that guy. He's got to be the guy, in my opinion, in that starting lineup because there's nobody else that can.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, that's well thought out by you because it's got to be him because I don't know. I agree with you. It can't be Blackwell. You could say Boyd, but I mean, you really need your PG to guard the other team's PG.
Mm-hmm.
And, Boyd is good defensively, but you're going to need Boyd, 9 times out of 10 to guard the PGs going against on the other side. So it's going to have to be Rhodey, and that's, I hate to keep harping on this and stuff, but it bothers me. It still bothers me. I think losing Amos is a really big deal because we saw it, when they got matched up against Minnesota and nobody could guard Darson Garcia. And both times, it was Xavier was that defensive stopper. And I really think just a second year being there and learning the league and stuff, I just think that's a big loss. And he, to me, offered that athleticism and length that could have been a defensive stopper for them. So, I think you're right because Rhodey got, just going up and down this roster, I'm not sure who else it could be.
I think it's got to be him. And I think you're dead on with Amos, by the way. I think if he comes back, it's a home run. It's a home run retention win. He would be your 6th man. He would be your backup 4 and 5. He gives you athleticism. He gives you length. I thought there were moments down the stretch last year where you were starting to see the version of Xavier that we thought we would see all year. Yeah, that's a big loss. The other one is Carrington, maybe off the bench. He's 6'4", 6'5". He has length.
True.
But again, he's coming off the bench. Like, you got to have a guy in your starting lineup that can be that guy. I think it's got to be Rhodey.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, and what really, and I'd be really interested, obviously we're not privy to the postseason meetings with the staff and player and stuff like that. But, I think Amos would have been hard to get beat out for the 4 spot if they were legitimately going to give him an opportunity to compete for that spot. If the plan was playing Nolan at the 5, like, is Rapp better than Amos, especially in his second year in the program, playing in that league? I just think you started to see him the game slow down for him a little bit, and him starting to put things together at the end of the year. And like you said, and again, it's different now because NIL, and it's all salary cap related and this and that and opportunity. And I'm sure agents and people are telling him he can go somewhere else and get way more shots and way more minutes than he was going to get at Wisconsin. It's just a shame because you could see that ceiling. He had a high ceiling. You could see it coming together, and it's just the way of today's game. I don't think it's anything the staff is to blame or Xavier himself. It's just kind of the world we live in, unfortunately, with how this all works.
Yeah, man, that's an interesting question. Like, if all things were equal and you could choose, Rapp or Amos, what would you do? I think Xavier for next year. I just think he's a little longer, more physical. Now, again, there's a chance you have Rapp for 3 years, counting this upcoming year, and that probably factors into it. But yeah, man, that's a loss. Let me throw this to you. I've got a couple concerns. You tell me which of these is the biggest concern that you would have for this roster, the way it's constructed right now with what we know of it. I think, there's still a chance they add another big body, but with what we know now, here are my big concerns. Interior defense, overall depth, like who is the backup 1, the backup 3, the backup 5, or overall perimeter defense? What is your biggest worry there? Interior, lack of depth, or perimeter defense?
Well, you took the 3 that I was going to say. I will, to make a better podcast, but I would say number 1 is depth. Like, yeah. I don't, and I think that was one of the strengths of this past year's team was their depth, and I think it enabled them to have a much more successful season than everybody thought. But to me, I don't know. I don't see the depth in this year's team. So I would rank depth number 1. I would rank number 2 interior post defense, and then number 3 perimeter, and and just in general defense. Because we talked about in some of the earlier shows some targets we were talking about in the portal, and guys we were wanting to go over some athletes, some guys with size and length and stuff. That's why they gave up 90 or 91, whatever BYU hung on them and stuff, is perimeter defense in their losses. You looked at the points that the Badgers in their losses, the points that they gave up on the defensive end, and the majority of it led to perimeter defense. And those 3 concerns, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I think those are the 3 weaknesses if you look at the roster as it's constructed today.
Yeah, let's wrap up on this, because I think you and I both agree on this. Like, the defense is a big question. I think depth is a big question, but we also talked about how maybe this lineup could be a little better in certain ways defensively. Let's flip it. I think a lot of people are just assuming this offense is going to be a juggernaut again. Is it possible, losing Crowell and the passing gravity he had and the fulcrum he had in the middle of that offense, that this offense can't replicate what they did last year?
I would say no, because you don't have John Tonje. I mean, he put together an All-American season. And, like you and I discussed, I mean, he almost went 90-50-40.
Yeah.
And it's not to discourage this year's, or be negative or have a bad view of this year's team. I just think what that type of year that Tonje put together and the way he played at that game against BYU and stuff, like, it was special, and you just don't see it. And it just all came together, and the staff did. Tonje obviously deserves all the credit, but the staff did a great job in the situations they put him in and how they used them and just how they just all fit together as a unit. I just think it's a big leap to say that they could be better offensively without a Tonje. But to your point, though, I do see, and I could see overall as a unit, they could in a sense be better offensively, because they could be more versatile and harder to guard because they have so many different players and people that can score from different spots on the floor than, they had last year. And again, we saw the jump Blackwell did from year 1 to year 2. I got to assume he's in for another jump. You got to assume Nolan Winter had a great jump from year 1 to year 2. I think he's in for another jump. Janicki, I think is, so, you might, in the grand scheme of things, you might be right. They might be. I just think it's going to be a little different because it was just such a special year by Tonje.
Yeah, it's certainly hard to replace that. I think Boyd coming in helps you with Blackwell.
Yep.
Like, you might see a very different, very, very different version of Blackwell this year than you saw last year, just because of Boyd getting him into sets and just letting him kind of go hunt buckets.
That's a great point. We keep on. I know we talked about it in our deep dive in Boyd, but it's a great point because they haven't had a pure PG. Even though Chucky is a PG, he was a different type of PG, more of a scoring PG. And I think Boyd is, just a pure PG. And I think it's going to be different. It's going to be exciting to see what, having that at their disposal will do for them.
Yeah, I agree. Coach, man, as always, dude, it is great having you on the show. Always appreciate the deep dives and the insights from Coach. For everyone tuning in, thank you so much as always, for jumping on. We got a bunch of content coming up this week, so continue to tune into Locked On Badgers. Thank you so much, as always, on Wisconsin, and we will talk to you tomorrow.